Remember, no profanity. We're live. All right, folks. Good evening. We're live. This is our first stab at an intentionally planned remote live webinar. We've had a couple of them before in the past, but it was mostly due to weather issues. So what we tried to do here is reach as many folks as possible. Hopefully we'll get more people joining at the call at the top of the hour. So this is the Mobile First, Cloud First user group of DC. And we got some events that are coming up. Of course, tonight we're happy to have Brian Noyes to talk about leveraging Azure mobile services. It actually is a webinar. Next week on Monday, the Northern Virginia SQL Server user group, we're doing a hands-on guided lab. We're going to use one of the TechNet labs and walk through a lab called Migrate to an Azure SQL Database. And we've got some wraparound content for folks that are new to the Azure SQL Database. So it won't just be walk in and do the lab. You'll have some context provided for you in a lab environment, and that'll be out in Reston. Then on October 3rd, we've got Reston SharePoint Saturday. I believe Nakia is speaking at that event. Nakia is my partner in crime on this user group. We help run it together. On October 26th, we've got another live webinar. We've got Microsoft Technical Evangelist for, I believe, infrastructure and cloud is going to be talking about starting a business leveraging Azure. And he just wrote a book about that topic. And we might have him back in November for Windows 10 in the enterprise. December 5th, make sure you sign up for SQL Saturday. That's in Chevy Chase. You can go to SQLSaturday.com to get information about the DC SQL Saturday. It's usually about 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with about 7 to 9 tracks and about 6 sessions. So, 48 sessions of SQL Server plus some really good networking, not to be missed. And then a little bit more about Mobile First, Cloud First. We formed about a year ago, and as of today, we have 588 members. We're moving to a different pattern. We're doing the monthly live webinars where we post the slides and post the recordings. And then every quarter, we're going to do an in-person lunch and learn, or even a breakfast lunch and learn. We'll try to figure out the timings for folks. The first one, and we'll focus on the hands-on labs. We'll probably do our first one on the Azure Active Directory hands-on lab. And then, of course, we're the user group that provides the push for the IT Pro Camp that we did for the past 2 years. That's a big event. We have 300 plus people, 10 tracks, 6 sessions, 60 sessions of content, hands-on labs, good networking. It's awesome. So that'll be April 16th on 2016. That's posted on our Meetup site, but it's not live yet, and there's not much information. I just wanted you to do a save the date. So make sure if you can, hit up Mobile First, Cloud First DC, and then also follow us on Twitter. So tonight our speaker is Brian Noyes, and I'll let Brian go ahead and introduce himself because he's got an impressive resume, and I don't want to miss anything. And that's what's nice about working in the tech community in the DC area is you get to meet so many strong professionals like Brian. So Brian, I'm going to go ahead and give control to you. And again, thanks for coming out and presenting for us.
All righty.
And send it your way. I think I did.
Yeah, I'm working on accepting. And let me know when you can see my screen.
Okay. Yep, I can see it.
Alrighty, so welcome everyone, and thanks for giving me the chance to come talk to you here. As Tim said, the topic here is mobile services as a general topic. Now, the title here is slightly different than what was in the Meetup group, and you'll kind of see why as I go through the materials here. But the TLDR is that mobile services functionality in Azure is changing. There was an original release of mobile services, and it's now being superseded by a new thing called Azure App Services Mobile Apps. So I'll talk through what the similarities and differences are there, but I wanted to make sure to give you, kind of the current information, even though it's still in a preview state. I am from a company called Alliance that I helped co-found. We do consulting on a wide range of technologies, architecture consulting, and project development. So we can do everything from come in and advise someone, for a day or a half a day on technologies to go ahead and build their multi-year project for them. I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director. That's a program, if you haven't heard of it, that's somewhat similar to the MVP program, just a lot smaller. There's about 130 of us worldwide that were selected for that program, and we have very good channels into the product teams and into senior leadership at Microsoft to give feedback and try to help steer the ship somewhat, or at least nudge it from the side, and obviously also help evangelize the products. I'm also a Windows Platform MVP and Pluralsight author. I've got about 8 courses in the library right now. Unfortunately, none that directly overlap with this course, but there are some great courses on mobile services already there in the library. And if you're not a Pluralsight author, or I'm sorry, if you're not a Pluralsight subscriber and you want to check it out, just shoot me an email there. You can see my email at the bottom of the screen there, and I can get you a 1-month free pass. And it mentions at the bottom there, I'm on a variety of insider groups, but one of the insider groups not listed there that I'm on is the Mobile Services Insider. So I've been well tapped into this from before it was even released the first time, all through the changes that they're going through now. And I'm going to be looking at what you're seeing on the screen there. So if anyone wants to jump in with a burning question, I'm happy to try to take those. Just someone will have to come on audio and tell me there's a question if it's in the chat window. Oh, also I should mention I've got a kind of a nasty cough, so if I suddenly go silent, it's because I muted it, so you don't have to listen to me cough. All right, so what we're going to talk about is first off kind of the big picture. Like I said, the world of mobile services in Azure is changing a bit, at least in terms of what the underlying technology is and exactly how you go about it. The overall functionality is exactly the same, plus some new stuff. So you're not losing anything if you've checked out mobile services in the past. You're getting all that same stuff in kind of a new, more functional wrapper and the ability to do more things with your mobile services. And then we'll kind of talk through the features and really focus on the 3 main things that you do with mobile services is work with data, do security for your users, basically allow them to log in and know who they are and possibly authorize what they're allowed to do in the app, and also send push notifications out to those users when appropriate. So the place where we're at here, the kind of the timeline of Azure Mobile Services and the new thing, which is called Azure App Services .mobile apps, is that mobile services first went publicly released, or what they call general availability, or GA, for any of the Azure offerings. Since you guys are a cloud first group, hopefully you've heard that terminology before, but the first release of mobile services was a couple of years ago in June 2013. It was actually in preview for quite a while before that, I think at least 6 months, that people were able to play with it before it hit general availability. And when it first came out, the only option for the way you wrote your backend was to write JavaScript. It's actually a Node.js backend was the option there. And that was great for some people who didn't have any backend experience and maybe had already done some JavaScript development, so they could just jump in there. The other thing that was nice about the Node.js backend is you didn't have to write any code if you didn't want to. You could basically have data services and persistence of your data with full CRUD cycles on top of that data without writing a line of code, which is pretty cool. But a lot of people, kind of, one, didn't want to have to write JavaScript for back-end code if they weren't used to doing that, and two, probably already had a lot of .NET experience, and about that same time was when ASP.NET Web APIs came out, and so there was a strong push there to say, let us write these as normal .NET backends. So they released that capability about a year ago in August 2014. And you basically use the structure of an ASP.NET Web API as the way you write your backend, and then you deploy it to mobile services as a container that code runs in. Now that brings us to, kind of current day, is that back in March, they announced this new bundling of services. And if you think about, that list I mentioned a moment ago, let me just go back there. The bottom three bullets there of what mobile services focuses on mostly is, retrieving and working with data, securing your app, and possibly doing push notifications to apps. It's not just mobile apps these days that need to do that. Things like websites might need to do that. Something that's a back-end, batch-oriented process that goes and churns through, a bunch of uploaded files and comes up with results might need to notify someone when they're done. So there's a lot of overlap when you get into different architectures and different sets of requirement that, any kind of app, whether it's mobile, web, logic, or just a web API that's exposed for custom integration, those things all need those capabilities. So what they did is they came out with, or they're coming out with, it's in preview right now, this overarching term called the Azure App Service. And within that, just conceptual container, you can build mobile apps, web apps, logic apps, and API apps. And it's kind of a building block approach to those things. So basically what you have is a common infrastructure for how you go about doing data storage and retrieval. How do you go about securing the incoming calls to your backend? How do you go about doing push notifications to devices? How do you scale those services? How do you manage those? And how do you bill for everything the app is doing? And they kind of bundle those all together into these 4 different types of apps: mobile, web, logic, and API. Tonight we're just going to focus on the mobile one, and I'll show you how it's really just an evolution, sort of a V2 of what mobile services first brought to the table a year to 2 years ago. So if you start, trying to list out the features of both, and that new term is kind of cumbersome. Saying Azure App Service Mobile App is the precise way of saying the new stuff, and Azure Mobile Services is the precise way to say the old stuff. But keep in mind, number one, the old stuff is still the only production-worthy thing at the moment. The new stuff is in preview, so it's definitely worth playing around with, and based on a lot of the other stuff in Azure and the sort of the general timeline of when they put something out there for preview to when it goes GA is usually in the realm of 3 to 6 months. So this was announced back in March. I would expect unless they're having problems getting it all working right, I would expect it's probably not too far out before this goes GA. But the fact is, if you were going to, sprint today and write a production app and get it out within a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, you really actually should focus on the Azure mobile services that's production worthy today. But if you look at the features side by side, you see a whole lot of similarity here. First, there's data services. With Azure mobile services, you can think of it as you were in a more tightly constrained box when you did Azure mobile services. They were designed to be as simple as possible for a mobile app developer, a client mobile app developer, to be able to spin up some services to support his mobile app without having to know a whole lot about back-end development. But as a result, there were some limitations you could run into with some of that stuff. So for example, with the data service functionality of Azure mobile services, it was kind of assuming that you were going to use Azure SQL database. There were ways by pulling in some other libraries and stuff that you could certainly still go out to blob storage or table storage and the different forms of storage in Azure, but it was, it kind of led you down the path of put your data in SQL Server. On the new side, that is still sort of the out-of-the-box easiest way to store data, but again, they make it much easier to enlist things like DocumentDB or a Mongo backend or table storage or blob storage as part of your data services. The authentication and authorization is very similar to what was there in mobile services before, and I'll talk you through what that looks like in code in the demo tonight. Unfortunately, my demo app is not fully working at the moment on that aspect. So I'm going to have to follow up with the team and see what stopped working there. But I discovered it today and was not able to work my way through it. But I can kind of cover how it should work and show you the code that makes it work, and at least part of the experience, the logging in and authenticating. But basically all they've done there is sort of repackaged it so that not only mobile apps can take advantage of this. It's also for web apps, logic apps, and API apps as well. Push notifications, same backend infrastructure. A couple ways to go about it I'll talk about. Custom APIs, same capability there pretty much. Scheduled jobs was what they called it in Azure Mobile Services. One of the newer features that came out since mobile services first released is something called web jobs, where you can do basically a scheduled job or a cron job, people sometimes call them, but you do it within the web hosting container of your website. And so they just leverage that functionality now for the app services. And then offline data sync was another capability they added to mobile services about a year ago, and they're carrying that forward as well. That's more of a client-side functionality that you can pull down data. You kind of work against your local store on the client side, and then you command the SDK, tell it go ahead and sync with the backend tables now, and it tracks things through date time markers and version stamps and things like that. Now on the bottom right, I also say web pages, comma, and I meant to have ... there. One of the big differences here between the old mobile services and the new mobile apps is that your mobile app is first and foremost a web app. So the container that it sits in is the same kind of web app that you would deploy web pages to, whether MVC, web forms, flat HTML, CSS, JavaScript files. It is a full web host container there, and that means you can do things like SignalR and any other kind of web construct, web job example that you would do within a web app container, you can also do within your mobile app container, because those are all shared services. Oh, got some weird animation there. Let me just build the slide here. So, kind of in picture form, the whole point here is to say there's lots of different clients out there that you want to get your functionality to, different form factors, different platforms. Some of them misspelled. That Android looks like Android, but basically there's a lot of different things you might be writing to on the client side. Now, mobile services does not alleviate your pain on the client side any in terms of targeting those multiple platforms. The primary choices these days are still either doing Cordova to go fully cross-platform, or Xamarin to go fully cross-platform, or go native on each platform that you want to target. And that choice is always a difficult one. Mobile services just says we're going to support all those to the extent that they can. So what you actually have on the client side is you have an SDK that you can download, or that you can just link into your project in the case of something like Objective-C, and it provides the API that your client code talks to, and it does the service calls to the back end. And the idea is that you have this thing kind of hovering in the center there, which is your one-stop shopping, if you will, from that client application's perspective. All these concerns of I need data, I need security, I need push notifications. I don't want to have to go, integrate with 3 totally different things to get that all done. You basically integrate with your mobile app as a hub. And terminology here is a little awkward to me, at least, because if you chop off the leading term there of Azure App Service, that indicates that it's a server-side construct, and if you just call it mobile apps for short, well, mobile apps in my mind is the client app that runs on the client device. But in the context of this thing we're talking about, the mobile app is the server-side services exposed by Azure for your mobile app's consumption. So it's a little kind of strange term there to put the mobile app on the back end. But what the other arrows and stuff there are trying to show is that in terms of data, the straight down path there is kind of the primary that they give you the most help doing, and that's talking to the Azure SQL database on the back end. But it's very easy through the APIs of the SDK and through other SDKs you can pull in from Azure to talk to table storage, blob storage, DocumentDB is on the, there we go, got a full build, DocumentDB on the left or MongoDB on the right. Lots of stuff out there of different ways you can store your data. And then on the left, you see identity providers. So the other thing just about every mobile app wants to do, especially consumer-oriented ones, is leave it up to the user what kind of credentials they use to log in. You, as the mobile app back end, just need to know a unique identifier basically for the user. You might want to know their name or their email, and you can collect that if you need to. But the idea is you don't want to manage their whole experience of defining an identity and managing that identity. You just want to have a way to validate their identity before they come in and start using your backend functionality. So Azure Mobile Apps makes it very easy to integrate with Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft accounts, and Azure Active Directory. And Azure Active Directory itself becomes a bridge to many other forms of authentication that can integrate through the Active Directory protocols, such as on-premise Active Directory or other, things like Salesforce or things like that. This slide just kind of says a lot of what I just said in pictures, in words, just for your reference there. Now, this is one of those things that, the initial thrust of mobile apps was all about productivity. And, if any of you are more architecture minded, that should make you worry a little bit. Occasionally in the past, Microsoft has pushed things out the pipeline where it was all about productivity, and it led you down the path of writing code that is really stupid and unmaintainable. Things like the SQL connections in your markup for web forms pages come to mind. They demoed great, but I would never want to write that kind of code for maintainability. This is productivity oriented, but it is very good, well-structured architecture, and it doesn't make you end up in a bad place. So in general, when you hear productivity focused, you should be wary. In this case, I'm telling you that, at least from my perspective, they did a good job here, and they don't take you down a path that gives you a bad architecture. The one thing you kind of have to get used to here, I mentioned up front that there were two releases there. There was the first release that was a Node.js backend, and then the subsequent release a year later that had an ASP.NET backend. The way things are kind of leaning with the product team is they're definitely focusing on .NET first now. So with the Azure App Service here, the mobile apps first came out with ASP.NET support, and they just posted a preview of the Node.js stuff about a week or two ago, a blog post that outlines it, and I've got a link in the slides here to that. So they're still planning on supporting both of those approaches. The Node.js approach is slightly different than what it was before. You do have to write some code now. Even if you're just going to do basic CRUD, you don't get that kind of no code but free CRUD that you did in the first version of mobile services. They may end up supporting that, but at the current time they don't. For the security side, as I mentioned, those are all the different providers that it supports for identity providers. And let me go back a slide. I didn't highlight one thing on this diagram I wanted to, and that's the notifications on the right. What we had there in terms of notifications is originally they supported going from the mobile app straight over to the three main notification services: Google Communication Manager, Apple Push Notification Service, and Windows Notification Service. And actually, the Microsoft side was segregated at first. There's also WPNS for Windows Phone Notification Service, and it basically had an API on the mobile app side that you could do those push notifications to each one of those, and you'd have to kind of manage on your own which of your users were on what kind of device, and therefore which one did you call to when you needed to send a push notification to an individual user. The thing they integrated later, and is definitely supported now with the mobile apps as well, is to use Azure Notification Hubs. Azure Notification Hubs is yet another service of 40 or 50 some services now and being offered by Azure. Notification Hubs builds on top of Azure Service Bus and basically solves the problem of high-scale delivery of push notifications to many different platform devices. So instead of having to do that kind of management of per user, per device, and then doing this sort of switch case logic yourself to figure out what backend push service to call, you can just set up templates ahead of time and say, Notification Hub, you keep track of what platform my users are on, and I'm just going to send you one thing to blast out to all of them or a subset of them, and you do the fanning out for me to the individual notification services. And so that's generally a better way to go these days. So So basically, it still supports both those things, either direct to each individual platform's push service or going via Azure Notification Hubs. The Notification Hubs takes a little bit of extra setup up front to sort of provision it and get it set to go for your users. But then when it comes to the code that makes each individual push notification happen, that code gets much more simple because it's a single notification to the hub and let the hub figure it out from there. Web jobs, as I said, if you have any kind of scheduled periodic things you need to do, or maybe big batch-oriented things, you can still manually kick these off with a simple web API call. But these things now live within the container of your web app, and so you don't have to go and set up some separate worker role. Would be the old way to do it when Azure first came out. We've got web jobs and scheduled jobs as separate features out there on Azure, but this kind of sits within the boundary of your application. And then offline data storage and sync, like I mentioned, is a client-side feature. I won't go into details on tonight, but it basically has an API where you just do the same kind of calls I'm going to show in the demo. You just do them slightly differently and say you're doing it against a sync table, and you tell it when to sync, and you're basically always writing to the local store and letting sync take care of delivering it to the back end and bringing you down any data that showed up on the back end since the last time you synced. So to build these things, I'm just going to cover this quick and then we'll get into demos. Basically, you got to first decide, which backend type are you going to use, Node.js or ASP.NET. I'm going to focus on the ASP.NET side tonight. Then you go through a process of steps you'll have to do in the Azure Management Portal. Excuse me. And you'll hear this referred to as the preview portal or the new portal. There's the old portal and the new portal. And because this is a new feature, the only place you can work with it is in the new portal. If you want to work with the currently released and production-worthy mobile services, you go to the old portal. They're not going to bother putting that in the new portal as far as I know, because they expect people to start switching over about in the same timeline that they're going to be switching over the portal. So basically you go through, create the app, identify what database you're going to connect to, and you can create that through the process. You do get a free 20 megabyte instance of Azure SQL DB that you can use for development and testing and things, so you don't have to start paying right away. But you can also obviously connect to any Azure SQL database that you've already pre-provisioned and scaled to whatever size you need to do. You configure a service plan that just says, what kind of hardware are you going to be running on, what kind of memory and disk size and CPUs and all that kind of stuff is part of your service plan. And then if you're going to be securing your app, which most apps will, you'll set up the security settings. And if you're going to do push notifications, there's a whole process for that. And once you got it out there and actually running, there's a number of options you can do in terms of auto scaling, for example. If you're going to have peak demand, maybe you're an NFL football app, and you know that app is just going to get highly taxed at 8 o'clock tonight when the Redskins go to play, because everyone's going to be watching that. So you want to be able to spin up new instances to handle that load. But hey, when the game's over, everyone shuts off that app. They don't open it until the next game. So something like that, you can set it up to auto scale and just have it say, oh, look, things are getting busy. Spin up a new instance, spin up a new instance. You can put thresholds on that to say, don't go above this many instances because I can't afford to pay that bill that month. You can also get good monitoring and logging provided to you by the infrastructure, which is kind of nice. So with that, instead of more words on slides, let's just jump into a demo and just take a peek at the thing here and answer any questions to date. Let's see here. Okay, so will I talk about offline data sync and which phones this works with? So I'm not going to demo it. I don't have code ready for that, but basically it's using a SQLite database as the data store, which is supported on all the platforms that the SDK itself supports. So the SDK, you kind of have to go in, I'll show you here as I get into the demo in the portal. There's supported from a true support perspective, and there's can I figure out how to do it on a given platform. The docs always lag the support somewhat. So sometimes you'll go into the docs and, for example, it'll only list how do I do it on iOS, how do I do it on Windows, and how do I do it on Xamarin Forms. But you're building a Cordova app, let's say, and you kind of go, oh, I guess I can't use Cordova. Well, that's not necessarily true. They just haven't gotten around to writing the documentation for that. So you have to do a little deeper digging to see if you can actually use that feature and whether it's supported. And reaching out to people like Microsoft reps like Tim, or any of your community leads like myself, just reach out to us by email, and we can dig it up faster than you by talking to the product teams usually. Scenarios for using SignalR versus BizTalk. Well, really it would be SignalR push notifications. I'm not sure about the overlap with BizTalk there. BizTalk could certainly be integrated with and used to send messages to other applications and services that are integrated with that BizTalk service. SignalR is going to be for, the limitation to SignalR to realize is mobile apps are only running when they're on the screen generally. So SignalR still works great and can be used for that if you want to, send real-time feedback to someone who's staring at the screen using your app that, hey, a new order just showed up, or whatever your app is supposed to do. You can do that directly with SignalR. But if you want them to also know that thing, even if they're not staring at your app, that's where push notifications come in. And you can either just tell them, hey, you should go launch the app, and they click on it and it launches the app, or you can even provide deep links. Oh, good. Cortana's going to take over my screen here. You can also put like deep links in your push notifications that will take you into the app and activate a certain screen with a certain record through that push notification. So often push notifications are going to be the best way to go. Let's see here. Other questions. Node.js was recommended for high-load applications over ASP.NET. It's really always hard to answer that question of which is going to be faster, because it depends entirely on what your code does. Node.js in general is very fast if all you do in your code is I/O. If all you're doing is reading and writing data to the database, then the processing code doesn't have to do anything except queue up that asynchronous I/O that goes outside of your process, and it's done. And Node.js can handle that very fast and reuse the threads. If you're doing any kind of complex computation, then ASP.NET's probably going to be better, but you just really never know unless you do some profiling and see. In general, I would say what drives people more is the more complex the code inside your service is going to get, the more you're probably going to want to be on ASP.NET anyway, both because it's more likely to be more CPU intensive, which are things that Node.js does not excel at, and you have the full richness of the .NET framework available to help you get that thing done. Okay, so with that, let me jump into demo mode here. So first place I'm going to go is to the portals. So when I said old portal, I meant this thing. So you go to manage.windows Azure, which is not even the accurate term anymore. It's now branded Microsoft Azure. But manage.windowsazure.com is the old portal. You go there, you log in with your Microsoft account. Typically, if you have an MSDN account, that's the one you're going to want to log in with, because you get a bunch of free hours and stuff with that one. But they also have pay-as-you-go plans for all this stuff. The new portal is at portal.azure.com, a little easier to remember. And you can see it's a very nice Metro-styled, I can say that because I'm not Microsoft, Metro-styled web app. And in fact, for those of you who also dabble in the web application arena, and you've heard the term single-page applications, this is one of the biggest, most complex single-page apps out there. This whole thing is written with Knockout.js as a library, and has all kinds of interactivity to it. So what you do to get started here is you would go in, and I'm going to kind of go down the path here a certain bit, showing you how to get started, and then I'm going to jump to a full application just so you can see a little bit more than I have time to go through step by step. But the place you're going to go here if you're starting up is web and mobile. And then you'll see web app, mobile app, API app, logic app, those 4 kinds of apps that I talked about. Obviously, in this case, you go to the mobile app. And just so you know the terminology, because you'll see this in documentation and stuff, each one of these little sort of flyout panels is called a blade. So they'll refer to, go to the mobile app blade, and they're talking about this little flyout panel. And so the first thing you would do is give the app a name. So we'll call this MFCF Demo 1. And in this case, I've got a bunch of different subscriptions I'm associated with. You control those up here. You can see these different directories I have association with. So that's more driven by what I had selected in the upper right at first. And then the resource group, you can create resource groups in Azure for all the different Azure services. And it's a way of just kind of grouping a bunch of things together to identify what regional data center are they going to live in, and make it easier to quickly affiliate those, and you can also do things like put virtual networks around those and things like that. But in the context of mobile services, it's more just pick the region you want your service to live in. And then the app service plan is another sort of logical container. You can see I have several defined here for different demo scenarios. When you pick this, over on the right, you can see instances and web apps. If you create new, which is what you would do the first time in, you can see you name it, you pick what region it's going to run in. That's the data center really, and then you pick a pricing tier. So probably the important thing about this is what you're going to be charged, for that given app service plan. And you can put more than one app into a single app service plan. It's just a way of, if you always go and configure a bunch of standard ones or basic ones or premium ones, it just makes it quicker than having to select it each time. And you can see here they give you, 3 options here, but you can say view all, and then you can see there's a bunch of other options, including, especially for playing around and trying stuff out, there's a free tier there that you can use, and that's what I'll be using in the app I'll be showing. So it kind of leads you through that setup, and you can just back your way out here by closing the blades that you went down through, and then you go and you say create. And it immediately puts a new tile here on your dashboard. If you want to pin, unpin things, you can do that in this app, but it pins it by default. While it's doing that, we could go into our all resources and go find it in the list here, and then we're going to see some activity here as it goes to it. We get the summary information here, and it's still kind of in the process of provisioning it. Up here at the top is where the notifications show up, so we can click up there, and for some reason there it goes. So deployment successful. That was just my creation here. So this thing's live now. And then there's a whole slew of different settings and stuff you can go through. I don't have time to go through them all, but the key ones to focus on are right here in this mobile setting. First off, to get started is a quick path to go find all the tutorials that will lead you through based on the client platform that you want to do this on. So for example, if you look at this list right now, it looks like Android native is not supported. You can probably get it working just fine with Android native. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the status of the Android SDK is for this, but these are the ones that are fully documented at this point. And another one would be Cordova. Well, Cordova under the covers is first and foremost HTML and JavaScript. So most of what they cover in here will apply to a Cordova app. But there are certain things like the login experience that when they fully integrate with Cordova, they do it through the native APIs, and it's the device that would pop up the screen that you log in through, as you'll see in my demo. So this is where you want to go to drill down and kind of work your way through the tutorials. You also use these, I use these all the time as just a checklist. As I'm setting up a new app, I go through and kind of use it as a checklist to get everything configured. The data here is where you'll have to go ahead and set up, where's your data going to live. And you can see here it has nothing by default, but it prompts me over on the right to do a SQL database. And then I have to go pick and say, do I want to create a new one or put this data into an existing one? what it will do is it will create a unique schema within whatever database you pick with the name of your mobile service as the schema name. So I named this one MFCF Demo 1. It would create a schema under whichever database I select or create named MFCF Demo 1. And it puts all the tables under there so that you can support different mobile services within the same container in the database. So I'll just say I want to put it in Demo 1 here and select. And then you start backing your way out. Okay, I forgot to do that part. So connection string, it's going to ask you for your username and password for that database. And I'm not going to bother typing this in for time's sake now. I'm going to jump to the completed app here in just a moment. But I wanted to give you a sense of, what are these steps you got to go through up front to get started. So in the interest of time and getting those who care to the football game, I'm going to go back here to my dashboard, which I can just click on the upper left corner, and it'll go back to the dashboard. And down here at the bottom, you can see this ZA Mobile one is kind of my fully completed, ready to go one. And so in this, I have set up my data to go in that Demo 1 database. I've configured my authentication, which we'll get to, and there's some settings associated with that I'll show once I get to that. But once you have this initial, really the minimum bar is get to the point where you've defined what your database is going to be. And then when you go into these tutorials, each one of them, step 2 here is download and run your server project. So they actually give you an ASP.NET server project that is a starting point. Now, it's always a to-do item scenario. The sample app that they give you is just a simple to-do list that you can add things to and click things as completed, is the CRUD scenario they support. But you can just download this and kind of throw that code away and add the code you need for whatever your data scenario is, which is basically what I have right here. So my little scenario I'm going to show tonight is ordering pizzas, which is appropriate because that's what I did for my son not 30 minutes ago, or maybe 40. And so basically when you first download that server project, what it's going to have here is it's going to have a controller that's called a to-do item controller. It's going to have a data object called a to-do item. And down in models, it's going to have a mobile service context, which is just a entity framework DB context, and it's going to have one DB set in there that'll be to-do items. So you basically throw away that one. You go define your own data objects, and when you define those data objects, the key thing you want to do here is notice this base class. So the base class, when you do this part of mobile services, this does put some, I won't say chains on you, but it puts some constraints that are not unreasonable constraints. Most of the time when you do CRUD, you need a primary key in your table. Now notice it's a string. They do that so that it could be an integer, it could be a GUID, it could be a string like ALFKI in the Northwind database. So they make it a flexible field type. If you really want to have an integer column in the database, or you really want to have a GUID column in the database, you can do that. You're just going to have to use something like AutoMapper to translate between the schema that mobile services wants and the schema that you want. If you really don't want to do that at all, the other option is just to do what's called a custom API, in which case you're just writing a plain old ASP.NET web API in which you can use any framework, or you could use ADO.NET data connections, or you could be using Hibernate, or you could do whatever you want with whatever schema you want with whatever data storage technology you want, because at that point it's just an ASP.NET web API. But it's still hosted within this mobile services container and can benefit from things like the authentication that we'll get to here. But if you do what are called the kind of tables of mobile apps, and mobile services was exactly the same, you have this set of columns that every table will have for you, and that's kind of dictated to you, so they give you the base type that defines those columns. And if you expand the comments here, you can see that they've done certain things like put a clustered index on certain things and make made things identity columns when appropriate, and so on. Okay, so then, getting down to your functionality and the data you really want to work with, you can just put plain old auto-implemented properties here on your model types to define what your meaningful schema is to you. And you do that for each one of the objects you're going to work with. In our case, we're going to list products. We're going to be able to select those products and start an order by creating order items. And then we're going to associate those order items with an order and submit that order and its order items. So as a result of that, we also need controllers. Each one of these needs to be exposed as an API, a CRUD-oriented API that you can call from the client side. So you have a controller for each one, and you get a base class for that from mobile services called a table controller of T. And you can scaffold these things out very quickly and easily if you've already defined the model object type and you have exposed it as a collection on a DB context. Then there's nice scaffolding here that you can just go in and say, I want to add, waiting for it to, there we go, and controller. And you can see up here we've got an Azure Mobile Apps table controller. And you would select that, and it would basically ask you what's your model type and what's your DB context, and then it would generate the controller with all this CRUD. This standard CRUD pattern here where you can get all, you can get one, you can do a partial update through a patch, you can post a whole new item, or you can delete an item. And it kind of normalizes that API for you and makes it so the base class does all the work. I'm going to go mute for just a second here. Okay, I'm back. So that's what it looks like on the server side, and really it's no more difficult than that, at least focusing on the data, as long as you can live with the constraints of those, those table schemas that they impose on you. Just add the object, add it to the DB context, and expose a controller generally by just spitting it out through the scaffolding. Then you need to get it actually up and hosted in the cloud. You can run this locally, and you can set up your client app to run just against your local service. So you can do all the debugging locally. They do have a container it runs in for debugging purposes. But pretty quickly, you're going to want to get it pushed up to Azure and make sure everything works fine there. So for that, we go and publish. Now, when you first do this, you're going to land on this profile page, and it's going to have these options. Now, it's kind of unintuitive to me, at least, in that they have some options here, but nothing that specifically says Azure mobile apps. But a mobile app, as I mentioned up front, is kind of sitting in a web app container. So theoretically, you're supposed to be able to click this, and you'll have to log in first, and then it should be showing you all of your mobile apps. Now, I'm actually talking to the product team about this. I was just talking to them today because I should be seeing my mobile apps here. According to them, it's not showing up for me in my case, but it doesn't matter because ultimately what you're doing through this wizard is creating what's called a publishing profile, and they already have one of those for you right out here in your mobile service. So if you go to the main blade of your mobile service, right up here, you can see this Get Publishing profile. So you can click on that and download a .publish settings file, and then you go back into Visual Studio, right-click, say Publish, and instead of any of these other options, you just import and go point to that file and bring it in. So I'm already set up there. I'm not going to muck with it and break my publishing. Excuse me. But I will go ahead and publish. Now, one key setting in here that's important to understand is sending your debug build to Azure. It's released by default, but if you come in here and switch it to debug, you can actually attach to the code running in the cloud and hit breakpoints in your Visual Studio environment. So I'm pushing out a debug build so I can show that. And in fact, I will go just put a breakpoint in my products table controller, the very first execution it'll hit. just to show that. And the way you get attached is you go into your Server Explorer, you expand under Azure App Service, go find your named service there, and you just right-click and attach debugger. So we'll take just a moment here to reach out to the cloud and do the right thing and set up a channel basically to that cloud-hosted service. Probably running a little longer because of Skype running. And then it throws up a browser because you can actually hit the root address of your application here in the browser, and in a moment it'll give a little winky happy page that says, yep, this thing is up and running and is good to go. And in fact, we could go up here and see that, ultimately what it's exposing here are just web APIs. So I can go to /table/product and hit it in the browser or with any kind of client that can issue an HTTP request, such as, say, Fiddler. And it takes a little moment here the first time through for it to actually hit the breakpoint. But any moment now, it should be coming up with the yellow arrow there showing, and there we go. So now it's actually on my breakpoint in my code on my machine, but the request has gone out to the cloud, to the actual deployed code. That's a really powerful capability to troubleshoot things not only in development, but especially if something's going wrong in production. So I'll just go ahead and run past that for now. And you can see back in the browser here in a moment, it'll just spit out a big spew of JSON. So that's all the data that's coming out of my table. Now, how that data got there, just to talk through it real quick, was I showed the process of going out here and setting up your database. Once you do, that's just an empty database. At least the schema associated with your app, in my case here, ZaMobile will be the schema name, is empty. But part of the project template here that they give you to start with is that this is code first entity framework. And so it's going to provision the database the first time you issue a request to query any of these or to do an insert, update, or delete against any of these tables. It's going to go and code first generate your table schema based on your model objects. And you can see down here there's a model creating. That's kind of standard entity framework stuff I won't get into. It also has in your, let's see, where do they put it? In the Web API config, they set up a database initializer here. So if you need to seed some data programmatically, you can do that from here. So it's doing code first, and it supports code first migrations and all that kind of stuff because it's just entity framework and SQL on the back end. So the first time you hit it, it's going to create the schema. So basically when I was putting this together, I did it once, just did a request in the browser like I just did, and it went and provisioned the database with the right schema based on the object model I had defined. Then I went in and created a script and connected to that database. Once the database is created, it's just an Azure SQL database that you can connect in the normal way, which would be with SQL Management Studio. And so you can go out there. You do have to go through the portal to the SQL server and grant your IP address access. It blocks it by default. So that's a step I've already taken care of. And it gives you set up the username and password. You got to write that down so you remember it. There's nowhere to look it up in the portal. And you can see now I'm looking at that Data 1 and ZA were the two databases you saw in the portal. And when I go into the tables, you see ZaMobile orders, items, and a migration history because of the code first nature. So you can, basically what I did is I wrote a script to inject a bunch of product records into that table and just executed that script to provision it. I could have done it through the mobile service initializer as well if I wanted to do it in code. I just happened to already have a SQL script that did that. Okay, so then finally you get to, the end goal of all this is to start writing a mobile app that actually consumes these services. So over here on the client side, what I have is a Windows 10 app. You can do a Windows 8, you can do WPF, you can do Windows Phone apps, you can do iOS apps, you can do Android. You saw it all on the slide there. Every conceivable modern platform is pretty much supported here. So I just chose Windows 10 as the latest, greatest, cool stuff to play with. You can see a fair amount of code here. I obviously wasn't going to type all this by hand, but what it really boils down to here, first let me run it so you can see the stunning functionality and beautiful design of my demo app. Try not to choke. Comes up here or not. Oh, I just have a breakpoint. It's it. Okay, well, let's get rid of that breakpoint so that doesn't keep happening. Okay, so first you see some product data pops in there. Notice it's got images. I'm not delivering those images over the web API. I just dump those images. If I go back to my server project, I just dump those images into a images folder in my web app. Because this is just a web app deployed to a web server, and it can accept HTTP requests for flat files. So if you want to put an Angular SPA inside there, let you provision your data and work with it, you can do that as well. It's just part of the website. SignalR hubs or ASP.NET MVC pages or web forms or whatever you want to put in here, you put all that in that container. But what we're focusing on is the client side. So it renders out this data. It's just got a file name basically for the images, and then formulates the full path. And then in this case, Windows UWP platform is downloading those asynchronously. And we can go and click the Add to Order buttons, and we're putting together an order up top that we want to submit, and then we go and submit that order. Now, I've already got the authentication hooked up here, so you can see it pops up a dialog. Thing to realize is this is the operating system doing this. This is not your app. That's part of why you want to use the Mobile Services SDK, is it integrates this whole login experience, so your app never has access to your user's credentials. That's managed by the identity provider, and this one happens to be configured to do Microsoft accounts. So let me log in real quick with one of my Microsoft accounts. And once it successfully logs in, now we're back in. You can see this authenticate async, what we just hit. And what that code did up top here, there's authenticate async, is it's using a proxy, which I'll show more in the code in a moment. It just calls login async and says what kind of login we want to do. So you could have a UI that the user picks. Do I want to log in, excuse me, with Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and then you call the appropriate, you pass the appropriate argument to login async. And that just triggers down to the OS level to say, go do the OAuth 2 thing with that identity provider. And it gives you back a user that's a object. You can see here it has a user ID. That's basically what you're going to rely on in your app to uniquely identify your users. And you can go back out to the identity provider and request additional pieces of information or claims about that user, such as email, first name, last name, and so on. There's APIs to do that, but by default, you just get a unique ID for that user with that identity provider. And so once that got done, then we ended up back down here in the code that triggered it. And you can now see kind of the standard code that you'll use with mobile services is, first off, you have to have a instance of a mobile service client. So anyone who's dealt with WCF before, this is kind of like a proxy object, a pre-built proxy for you that's able to speak the table language and the login language of Azure Mobile Services. And you have to pass it the root address, excuse me, of your site. And if you're doing authentication, you have to pass it this extra thing, which is called a gateway address in the documentation. And if you download the sample client that they give you, they already have this instance in there, so you can copy and paste it into your own code if you're going to write things from scratch. So that's being used as just a static, a global instance in the app here. And when we want to go work with one of those tables, we just get a reference to the table, client-side object that represents that table. And we can do things like insert async, or up above when we first load our data, get table up here and read async, and we get down the products and just push them into a collection and data bind to them. This is where I'm tacking on the extra address to get to those images inside that site. So that's basically what it looks like on the client side. Now the setting up of the async does require some additional easy but not fast setup. And the best thing you can do there, as I talked about before, is go back to your mobile app, go to settings, go down to the mobile settings that just popped in there asynchronously, get started, go out to your any of the client platforms in terms of setting up the server side is set up the same. You go to these links for the tutorials, and once you get into the documentation, this is just the initial setup a to-do app. Whoa, crazy flickering. Okay, Edge is freaking out on me, and my mouse is. Okay, this could be interesting. Are you guys seeing a normal screen, or are you seeing?
See your desktop with the Azure documentation.
Oh, fun. So you're the only ones that can see it. Let me see if I can Alt-tab around here and maybe get back to something on my end. I can see I've lost my mouse, and all I see are little gray rectangles all over the screen. Okay. I can't escape. I can't Alt-tab. And I may be done showing you stuff. Well, we're almost out of time anyway. I kind of wanted to go back to the slides there. Tell you what, someone tell me when I'm on the slides, I'm Alt-tabbing. I won't be able to control it anyway. So whatever you're looking at, hopefully it's not my, say password vault or something like this at this point.
It's the, you're looking at code.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. I have nothing but a taskbar at the bottom of the screen, and I have no control over anything. So I'm probably going to have to power off the machine when we're done here. But so just to wrap up, that hopefully that gave you a sense there of, what the process is like. You basically go in. The starting point is always go into the portal, set up your app, set up aspects of your app, such as what's your database. What are your authentication settings? What I was going to try to go to there is in that same mobile section, there's mobile authentication. And then you click on that and you have a list of Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter. And you click on those. And for each one of those, it gives you a link to the documentation of what do I need to set up with them. And it basically amounts to going out to their site, defining a project name or a product name for your app, and then giving it a little bit of information, and they generally give you back 2 pieces of information, what amount to a key and a password. And then you copy those down and you go back into the Azure portal and you paste them in there to say, when you go to authenticate on my behalf, because what's really happening here is your mobile app is talking to your mobile app backend, and it's the mobile app backend that goes off to the identity provider and authenticates you, kind of on your behalf, so that you don't have to integrate in the mobile app itself. You don't have to go talk directly to those identity providers. You just talk to the Azure Mobile Services backend, and it does it on the mobile app's behalf. So it kind of acts as a gateway in that sense, and that's why you have to have a gateway address to set all that stuff up. Likewise, when you get into notifications, obviously don't have time or capacity at this point to show this, but the notifications are actually simplest in concept, but one of the most complex to set up, especially, it's different per platform. With the Android platform, it's pretty straightforward. You go get a couple of keys, like I just described for the authentication piece. On the iOS platform, it is crazy complicated. It's all well documented on the Microsoft site in very good step-by-step instructions, but you got to go through it really meticulously. It's about 25 steps of creating certificate requests and generating certs and installing them in the cert stores on the Mac device and opening Xcode and stuff like that you got to do to get it all so that you can even try it and debug and see if your notifications are working. Not rocket science, but something you just got to allocate some time to go do meticulously to get set up correctly. And then once you do, basically, again, when you want to send a push notification, it may be in reaction. Let's say a new customer just placed a pizza order, and you want to send a push notification to the delivery driver to say, hey, get back here, you're going to have an order to take out soon. That's going to be code in your server side that makes that call to generate that push notification, and you just do that using the APIs that are available to you on the server side that make it very easy to do that push notification. So those are the core things. The additional things, I don't have time to go into detail on, are custom APIs. As I said, it's just basically an ASP.NET backend or a Node.js backend. You can write whatever kind of code you can write in those technologies, and they're just exposed through the HTTP interface. You've got the web jobs that you can set up scheduled things. You got the offline and syncing of data from the client side. So there's a lot more you can dig into here with the mobile services capabilities. So with that, I appreciate your attention. I can stick around for questions here if people want to give them to me by audio, because I can't see anything. If you have questions, I gave the slides and the demos to Tim to post up on the site, but you can always ping me at brian.noyes on either Gmail or Soliance.net.
Thanks, Brian. Do you want me to kind of read off the questions as they come in and see what we have here?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So we've got one from Osama Murad, and it says, besides docs, what would be a good reference on the new app? Besides docs, what would be a good reference on the new app service mobile app?
One place to start is if you just go search on Azure App Service mobile app. There's a kind of a landing site within the Azure site itself. They've got a couple videos up there, so that's a good just real basic, making sure you understand what you're dealing with, and just seeing some quick code, less than you saw tonight. And then that unfortunately the answer to that is not much. There are a couple blog posts out there by the product team themselves, but it's still kind of fertile experimentation ground at this point.
Excellent. So we got a couple people typing right now. Oh, okay. Thanks. It looks like that answered that question. George is typing up a question. The anticipation. Forget applications in the Azure. Hold on. Like abstract art with different colored fonts here. Well, while we wait for some questions to come in, Brian, again, I want to thank you for presenting tonight. Sounds like you've got dad duty, as do probably a few of us. And we really appreciate you taking your time to speak to the group. So we got anybody else asking questions? Got some good interaction during the session too. Oh, two more people are typing. Okay, I'll just kind of run through some admin notes, and if the questions comes in, cool. Just some general thanks and all that. Folks, remember we've got Brian spoke tonight. We appreciate that. I'm going to post I've already posted the link for his demo download. He's got about a 35 meg demo zip file that he has a link to. Brian has a link to. So that link information is on the meetup site. I have a link for that. I'll show you momentarily, as well as the slide deck. Don't forget about the upcoming user group events. So this is not exhaustive. There's a ton of stuff out there for different technologies that you might be interested in. This is the stuff that I just happen to know about. I'm actually presenting on Monday on Azure SQL Database. We got SharePoint Saturday for Reston. Got Blaine Barton coming in on October 26th. We'll pick a day for November. We're going to try some things with time. We'll also be surveying the members on the type of topics you want to see us present for 2016, as well as the best times of day or evening to do these live webinars, and also the best times for us to do the quarterly live and in-person events. So we want to reach you as much as we can. We're also going to do some offline podcasts that we'll put out there as well, because the content, I'm sure all of us can attest to that. The content coming from the Azure product folks is fast and furious, and it's hard to keep up with it. So there's certainly enough to do a couple of podcasts a month. A little bit about where the presentation information can be found on meetup.com, mobile first, cloud first, -DC, and files. And I have all of Brian's stuff uploaded. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Brian, for presenting. And we got a lot of thanks coming in. I don't know if you can see it or not, but you got a lot of thanks, and we appreciate it, and well wishes coming in on the comment bar. So you were a hit, sir. Oh, Brian, can you hear me? I think we might have lost Brian. Oh, he had to pause. That's okay. Oh, Brian had to reboot. All right, folks. Well, we'll go ahead and let you go. I want everybody to have a good evening and have a good weekend. We'll record we'll stop this recording, and we will go ahead and have the recording posted up here shortly. So thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you everybody.